Greetings, YouTube. It is I, Ian, and today I figured I would take a look at one of the DVDs in my collection that I have something of an interesting opinion on. And that DVD is Conan the Barbarian. Now, as some of you may or may not be surprised about, I am quite a big fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I've watched nearly all of his damn movies, and I know just about every single one of his one-liners. However, when it comes to movies that pretty much catapulted Arnold into fame, you can't really go back much further than Conan the Barbarian. Well, I guess you can. You can go back to really big crapfest movies like Hercules in New York, but those movies are really so obscure that they don't exactly count. But Conan the Barbarian was the movie that pretty much propelled Schwarzenegger into the fame that he has today. I mean, this movie is the reason why Schwarzenegger. This movie is the reason why Schwarzenegger was even considered to play the Terminator in the first Terminator movie, which was really the movie that made him famous worldwide. Was the very first Terminator movie. Yeah, but Conan the Barbarian came out in 1982, and it was directed by movie director John Milius, who is actually a very close friend of another film director who you guys may know as Steven Spielberg. Yes, John Milius is one of the many friends that Spielberg has, and he even helped write this screenplay. He worked with Spielberg to write the screenplay for Jaws, which is an interesting little bit of trivia for you all. Yeah, but now, let me talk about the actual movie. Now, before I talk about the movie, then I must stress to you all that I am a huge, huge fan of Conan the Barbarian. I think it goes without saying that not just Conan, but anything by Robert E. Howard is just, I love it. I love Robert E. Howard. I love his work. I love his writings. I love reading his characters such as Bran Mac Morn, King Kull, Solomon Kane, all those characters. You know, his horror characters, his fantasy adventure characters, anything like that. Now, the history behind Conan was basically that Robert E. Howard was an author, and as a young kid, he was fascinated with ancient history. He was fascinated with studying history of many of the world's greatest warriors and soldiers. And even and during his 20s, he traveled across the world to a lot of different places. And I can't remember the name of the actual place, but there was one place in particular he journeyed to, which gave him the biggest inspiration for the world of Conan, to the world of Hyboria. And, he basically took his knowledge of ancient mythology and fiction, and he used it to create a whole slew of characters, and a couple of which were actually set within the exact same world of Hyboria. If I'm correct, Conan and King Kull, another of Howard's characters, actually lived in the same world together. And of course, Conan was a character who, despite being called the Barbarian, he's adopted many, many other different roles. In fact, give me a minute. I have this comic book, Savage Sword of Conan, a trade paperback. Volume 1. I have another volume lying around. And I do actually have all of the original stories in print, uh, lying around here somewhere, and I have indeed read pretty much all of them, and I love it. I love everything that Robert Howard has done. So, one reason why you can definitely deduce as to why I love this movie is because I love Conan. I love the character. I love the whole mythology and the characters surrounding Conan. And this movie has something of a bad reputation. I mean, it's a popular movie, you know, there's a lot of people out there who like it a lot, but not a lot of like hardcore book readers actually like the movie. You know, not a lot of people out there who actually really love the source material. None of them really like the movie, which is understandable because the movie it strays very far from the source material, but I still enjoy the movie nonetheless. I still think it's a really great, awesome, very well made movie. Now, I'm not claiming that Conan the Barbarian is a cinematic masterpiece because it's not. It has dozens of flaws. Like, it has a lot of flaws. I'm not saying that it's an absolutely flawlessly made movie. I mean, you know, the plot makes little sense. The performances are really wooden. The dialogue is pretty bad. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of plot holes. There's just a lot of stuff that doesn't make any sense. But I actually think that kind of works to the movie's advantage. A couple of the holes and a couple of the things in the movie that don't make any sense, that actually sort of adds to the movie's appeal and charm. The thing I love the most about this movie is that it feels like an actual fantasy movie. Now, this movie inspired a whole lot of other really subpar, really crappy and trashy 1980s fantasy-inspired action-adventure movies like Krull, Dragon Slayer, Deathstalker. But of course, the main difference between Conan and those movies is that those movies were terrible, but this movie I like a whole lot. I love it. I don't know why. I love this movie. I can't explain why. Despite all of its flaws, it's not exactly a movie that you watch for like the characters or the story. It's just a movie that is fun and enjoyable to watch. I mean, there's a lot of good things about it, you know. And a lot of the stuff that doesn't make sense, like for example, at the beginning of the movie, when Conan's village is slaughtered by James Earl Jones's character Thulsa Doom, and you know, he along with a whole lot of the other kids are pretty much brought into slave labor. He's forced to basically push this gigantic industrial wheel, I guess you could say. And there's like this montage, this transition of time that suggests that Conan basically pushed that thing for decades, for literally his entire life, until he grew into a really big, tall, well, Arnold Schwarzenegger. He basically went from being a small, skinny little kid into Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know? And I guess you could make the argument that, oh, maybe he took a few breaks, maybe he slept, maybe he ate, who knows? But, I mean, they never explain why they use him as labor to do that, or anything like that. But the way that the movie is directed, the way that the movie is sort of edited and paced, it has a really awesome atmosphere to it. Sorry. It really has a sort of mystical, magical atmosphere and aura to it that not a whole lot of fantasy movies have. Because, you know, this movie is so well directed that despite all of its flaws, it still manages to be pretty entertaining and decent. Because, for one thing, the cinematography is excellent for a movie, well, for a movie from the mid-80s. And the way that all the scenes fit together, like, you know, we go from, like, a montage of Conan moving this huge wheel, and then it switches to him fighting in, like, a pit, and then training with a sword, and then we see another clip of him, you know, reading a scroll, and then he has sex with this woman, and then he gets freed. Just the way that all the scenes in the movie are edited together, it plays out almost like a fairy tale. It plays out almost like a fable of some kind. And I really think that makes it, I really think that sort of makes it a good, decent spiritual successor to the Conan books. You know? And this isn't a movie that you would really take seriously. It's not a movie that you would take, should be realistic, or a movie that you should easily believe. Like, there's just a lot of things that happen that don't make any sense and are never explained. But I actually think that adds to the movie's charm. Now, of course, the one thing about this movie that I have failed to talk about, and that everybody talks about in this movie, is the music. This film has some of the most incredible music you will ever hear in a movie. And I'm not saying that lightly. This movie's music was composed by a guy named Basil Polidorus, I think is how you say his name. The late, great Basil Polidorus, who also did the music for a few Tom Clancy adapted movies, like The Hunt for Red October and whatnot. But yeah, the music in this movie is utterly fantastic. It's like the only other epic fantasy movie out there that has music that's just as good as Conan the Barbarian is the freaking Lord of the Rings movies, you know. But my favorite scene, my favorite scene from this movie is actually pretty early on in the movie, where Conan, he falls in a cave, and then he's stuck in the cave, and he's trying to, like, you know, make a fire, and then he comes across this tomb of all these different ancient barbarian warlords and kings, and then he finds a sword that's covered in dust, but conveniently he bangs the sword on a metal throne, and then all of a sudden the sword is all polished and shiny, and it's, you know, it's all sharp, and it's ready to kill things. Even though that really wouldn't be possible in real life. But the scene works so well because the music and the lighting and the atmosphere is so amazing. It's one of my favorite movie scenes of all time. I love moments like that in movies. Movies that are moments that are so emotionally powerful. You know, it's great stuff. You know, I can't possibly talk any more about this movie. A couple of little nitpicky things, a lot of things that really kind of bothered me a little bit was how, you know, towards the climactic fight scene between Conan and Thulsa Doom's men, all of a sudden, right as one of his guys is about to kill Conan, all of a sudden, the girl that dies later on in the movie before that fight scene just shows up out of nowhere, and she blocks the guy's attack. But the weird thing is that she's dead. She's like a ghost, and then she, like, slices the guy's face, and then he's like, "Oh," And then she turns to Conan and she says, "Oh, you want to live forever?" And then all of a sudden, she just freaking disappears. It makes no sense. But it's sort of one of those instances where it doesn't really have to make sense. This is just one of those movies that, technically you could call it a bad movie, but to the open-minded, it's still a hell of a lot of fun. It's still an incredibly entertaining movie to watch. The characters are memorable. The scenes, the movie is very well paced. The scenes are put together extremely well. The music is incredible. The cinematography is great. Everything is great. Everything, visually about this movie is great. And if you're a movie fan, I cannot recommend this movie enough. This is really a fantastic movie. And dare I say it, I think it was probably the best fantasy-oriented movie before, the Lord of the Rings movies came around. It's a great film. It really is. And to all you Arnold fans out there, if you haven't seen it, then you're really missing out. Alright. This has been another My Thoughts video from yours truly. And have a good day.